Henry Dalton stood in front of the expansive mirror in his opulent penthouse, adjusting the cufflinks of his tailored white shirt. The reflection staring back at him was that of a man poised to take a significant step in his life, yet the flicker of uncertainty in his deep-set eyes betrayed the facade of confidence he tried to maintain. He ran a hand through his neatly combed dark hair, his mind swirling with thoughts of Rebecca Miller, the woman who had effortlessly captured his heart and brought warmth into the cold, calculated world he had constructed around himself. The wedding was just a week away, and as the date approached, so did an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't shake off the sense that something was off about Rebecca's family. They had always been pleasant during their interactions, but he sensed an underlying tension, a shift in their demeanor that made him uneasy. It was as if they were putting on a show, and he was nothing more than a prop in their play. "Henry," Rebecca's voice floated into the room, pulling him from his reverie. She entered the penthouse, her radiant smile illuminating the space as she glided toward him, her white dress for the engagement party flowing gracefully around her. "You look so handsome. I can't wait to be your wife," she exclaimed, her excitement infectious. "Thanks, Rebecca. You look breathtaking," Henry replied, a genuine smile breaking through his concerns. He stepped forward and took her hands in his, feeling the warmth radiating from her delicate fingers. "I've been thinking about our future together. It's going to be amazing." Rebecca's eyes sparkled as she squeezed his hands, but a shadow crossed Henry's heart. The thought of her family, particularly her brother, Jake, loomed in his mind like a dark cloud. There was something about the way Jake looked at him, as if he were measuring the worth of the man who intended to marry his sister. "How are your parents doing with the wedding preparations?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation away from his concerns. "Oh, they're excited. You know how my mom loves to plan events," Rebecca replied, her enthusiasm unwavering. "She's been working on the details nonstop. And Dad? He's just been trying to keep her calm." She laughed lightly, but Henry's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, can I ask you something?" he said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Of course," she said, tilting her head slightly, her brow furrowing in concern. "I've noticed some changes in your family lately. It's probably nothing, but I just want to make sure they're genuinely happy for us." He searched her eyes for understanding, hoping she would grasp the weight of his words. "Henry, my family can be a bit intense," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "But they love me, and they want what's best for me. They're just protective, especially Jake. He's always been like that." "Protective or possessive?" Henry pressed, unable to hide the concern in his voice. He felt a knot tightening in his chest as he spoke. "Come on, don't overthink this," Rebecca said, a hint of frustration creeping into her tone. "Jake just wants to make sure I'm making the right choice. He's always been there for me." Henry nodded, but doubt lingered in his mind. He loved Rebecca deeply. She was the light in his otherwise dark world. Yet, the idea that her family might have ulterior motives gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore the feeling that they might see him not as a partner for their daughter, but as a ticket to a more affluent lifestyle. Later that evening, they attended a family dinner at the Miller household, a sprawling estate that spoke volumes of their affluence. The walls were adorned with family portraits, depicting generations of Millers, all with the same steely gaze. As they entered, Henry felt a chill run down his spine. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being scrutinized. The dining table was elegantly set, a lavish array of fine china and crystal glassware that reflected the opulence of the family's status. As they sat down, Rebecca's parents greeted him warmly, but he could sense the underlying condescension in their smiles. "Henry, so glad you could join us," Rebecca's father, Mr. Miller, said, his voice booming with authority. "We've heard so much about you from Rebecca. Quite the catch, I must say." "Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here," Henry replied, forcing a smile. He felt the weight of the family's eyes on him, each gaze laced with expectations. Throughout dinner, he observed the interactions between the Millers and their staff. The way they barked orders and dismissed the servants with casual contempt made his stomach churn. "Pass the salt," Rebecca's mother snapped at a young waitress, who flinched at the tone. And be quick about it. Henry's jaw tightened. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he valued hard work and respect for others, regardless of their station in life. Watching the Millers treat their staff with such disdain was unsettling. Was this how they viewed their relationships, with people as mere tools to be used for their convenience? Henry, what do you think of the new charity initiative we're launching? Rebecca's father asked, shifting the conversation. It sounds like a noble cause, Henry replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. I believe giving back to the community is important. Mr. Miller nodded, but Henry could tell he was more interested in how the initiative would reflect on their family's reputation rather than the actual impact it would have. We'll be hosting a gala next month. It's a perfect opportunity to showcase our generosity to the community, he said, his tone dripping with pride. As the dinner progressed, Henry felt increasingly uncomfortable. He glimpsed Jake, Rebecca's brother, sitting across the table, his eyes piercing into Henry like daggers. There was an unspoken challenge in that stare, as if Jake were waiting for Henry to make a misstep that he could exploit. When the dinner finally came to an end, Henry excused himself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. As he splashed water on his face, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and realized that the man staring back was not only a billionaire, but also a man who had to tread carefully around the powerful family he was about to marry into. Returning to the dining room, Henry found Rebecca standing by the window, looking out at the vast estate grounds as the sun began to set. He approached her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, drawing her closer. "Are you okay?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. "I'm fine," he lied, though the knot in his stomach twisted tighter. "Just needed a breather. Your family, they can be overwhelming." Rebecca turned to face him, her expression softening. "They mean well, I promise. They just want to protect me. I hope you understand." Henry nodded, but doubt still lingered. "I just want to make sure you're happy, Rebecca. That's all that matters to me." She smiled, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. "I am happy, Henry. I love you. That's what matters, right?" As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a sense of foreboding settled around them. The love they shared felt like a fragile thread in a storm, and Henry knew that he would have to dig deeper into the shadows of the Miller family to uncover the truth before it was too late. As dawn broke over the sprawling Miller estate, a gentle mist clung to the manicured lawns, whispering secrets of the day to come. Henry Dalton, now disguised as John, the newly hired gardener, stepped into his role with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. He had donned the worn-out overalls and a faded cap, transforming himself into the very image of a humble laborer. Yet beneath the facade lay a mind sharp with suspicion and a heart burdened by love. With each step he took across the lush greenery, Henry's keen eyes observed the world that Rebecca Miller called home. The house loomed majestically at the end of the driveway, its elegant architecture a stark contrast to the shoddy treatment of the staff he had witnessed at the family dinner. He crouched down to tend to the flowers, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand while his mind churned with thoughts of Rebecca. She was sweet and genuine, a beacon of light in a family that seemed to cast long shadows. "Morning, John," called out one of the older gardeners, a wiry man named Tom, who had been working at the estate for years. "You're early today. Trying to impress the boss, are you?" "Just trying to get a head start," Henry replied, keeping his voice casual. He had to blend in seamlessly, lest his true identity be discovered. "These roses won't prune themselves." Tom chuckled, but there was an edge to his laughter, a weariness born from years of toil under the Millers' watchful eyes. "You'll learn quick enough that no good deed goes unpunished around here. Just keep your head down, and you'll be fine." As the morning wore on, Henry noticed the family beginning to stir. The sound of high heels clicking against marble floors echoed from the house, followed by the sharp tones of Rebecca's mother, Eleanor Miller. "Get that table set for breakfast, and make sure the coffee is strong. I won't have my guests waiting." Henry exchanged a knowing glance with Tom. The disdain in Eleanor's voice was palpable, a stark reminder of the condescension he had felt during dinner. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the surface of a much deeper issue. As he continued to prune the roses, he overheard snippets of conversation drifting from the patio, where Eleanor and Rebecca's father, Harold, were seated. "Did you see how that new gardener looked at me?" Eleanor huffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "I won't have them thinking they can step out of line. They need to remember their place." "Calm down, Eleanor," Harold replied, his tone dismissive. "They're just workers. They're not here to impress you. Let them do their jobs, and we'll keep this estate running smoothly." Henry clenched his jaw, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. It was one thing to be dismissive of staff, but it was another to dehumanize them. He felt a surge of protective instinct for Rebecca. How could someone with such kindness be born into such a cruel environment? "John," called out Eleanor, snapping him out of his thoughts. "Are those roses going to bloom, or are you just going to sit there daydreaming? I expect to see results." "Of course, Mrs. Miller," Henry replied, forcing a smile. "I'll have them looking their best in no time." With the morning sun climbing higher, Henry immersed himself in his work, his thoughts racing as he kept his ears attuned to the family dynamics unfolding around him. He observed Rebecca as she moved gracefully around the patio, serving breakfast to her parents with a smile that seemed to mask the tension in the air. She was the epitome of grace under pressure, yet Henry could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. As the day turned into afternoon, Henry took a break, wiping the sweat from his brow. He leaned against a tree, watching as Rebecca engaged in a conversation with a friend who had stopped by for a visit. Her laughter was a melody that filled the garden, but it was short-lived when Eleanor interjected. "Rebecca, darling, why don't you join us for a moment?" her mother called, a hint of impatience in her voice. "Of course, mother," Rebecca replied, her smile faltering slightly as she walked back toward the patio. Henry's heart ached as he watched her, knowing that beneath the surface, she was navigating a minefield of familial expectations and judgment. He resolved to learn more about the darker undercurrents plaguing the Miller family, convinced that Rebecca deserved better than this suffocating environment. Later that evening, after a long day of work, Henry found himself alone in the study, a room he had entered under the pretense of finding a tool. The scent of polished wood and old books filled the air, a stark contrast to the chaotic outside world. As he glanced around, something caught his eye, a file tucked inconspicuously under a stack of papers on the desk. His instincts kicked in, and he approached the desk, his heart pounding in his chest. As he carefully pulled out the file, he felt a rush of adrenaline. The papers were filled with financial statements and correspondences that hinted at discrepancies, large sums of money missing from family accounts, references to investments that didn't seem legitimate, and names of businesses that were not registered. Henry's brow furrowed as he sifted through the documents, piecing together the story they told. It was clear that the Millers were involved in something far more sinister than he had initially suspected. This was not just a family with a penchant for arrogance. It was a family entangled in financial misconduct that could ruin them if exposed. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Henry's heart raced. He quickly shoved the file back under the stack of papers, his mind racing. He couldn't be caught here. The stakes were too high. He slipped out of the study just as Eleanor entered, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Is anyone in here?" she called out, her voice laced with irritation. "I need to find some documents for tomorrow's meeting." Henry hurried back outside, the cool evening air hitting his flushed skin. He needed to find a way to confront Rebecca about what he had discovered, but how could he do that without revealing his true identity? The weight of his secret pressed heavily on him as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the estate. In the quiet of the garden, he thought of Rebecca's laughter, so bright, so full of life, yet so out of place amidst the darkness he was uncovering. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was racing against time. The more he learned about the Millers, the more he realized that he had to protect her, not just from the truth of her family, but from the consequences that would inevitably follow. As he stood there, lost in thought, he made a vow to himself. No matter the cost, he would uncover the truth and ensure that Rebecca would never have to face the betrayal of her family alone. He would find a way to expose their deceit, but first, he had to tread carefully, for the stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Miller estate. Henry Dalton crouched behind a row of vibrant azaleas, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, but it was the tension of the moment that made it all but suffocating. Disguised as John, the new gardener, he had spent weeks observing the family dynamics of Rebecca's household, and tonight, he felt he was on the verge of uncovering something sinister. Henry's breath caught in his throat as he noticed movement near the garden shed. The wooden structure, weathered and tired from years of neglect, had become the backdrop for clandestine meetings. He shifted slightly, careful to remain hidden, as he peered through the leaves. There, in the dim light, stood Rebecca's brother, Kyle, a tall figure with a reputation for being arrogant and spiteful. Accompanying him was a man whose presence radiated danger. His sharp features and slicked-back hair suggested a life spent skirting the law. "Are you sure he'll go for it?" Kyle asked, his voice low but laced with excitement, as if he were discussing the latest sports score rather than a plot to extort his sister's fiancé. The man smirked, crossing his arms. "Oh, he's a billionaire, isn't he? They always have money to spare when it comes to love. We just need to play our cards right. I know how to make him see things our way." Henry's stomach churned at the implications of their conversation. He leaned in closer, straining to catch every word. What if he doesn't take the bait? Kyle pressed, his brow furrowed with concern. "He will," the man replied confidently. "Just make sure you have the right evidence ready. That charity event is the perfect opportunity. You're going to need to catch him off guard." Henry's fists clenched in frustration. He had suspected Kyle's motives, but hearing the cold, calculated nature of their plan solidified his resolve. This wasn't just a family protecting their daughter. This was a scheme driven by greed and manipulation. The thought of Rebecca being caught in the crossfire sent a wave of determination coursing through him. He had to protect her, but how could he expose the truth without revealing his own identity? As the two men continued to plot, Henry's mind raced with potential strategies. He thought of Rebecca's innocent laughter and the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of her dreams. He couldn't allow her to be hurt by her own family's treachery. The weight of his love for her pressed heavily on his shoulders, and he felt the urgency of the moment. Suddenly, Kyle's voice broke through his thoughts. "I'll get the evidence. Just wait for my signal at the event, and we'll set it in motion. If he refuses to cooperate, we'll make it clear we have nothing to lose." With that, the shady figure nodded, and they parted ways, Kyle heading back toward the main house. Henry quickly retreated further into the shadows, his heart racing as he calculated his next move. He needed to confront Kyle, but had to be cautious. The last thing he wanted was to blow his cover. Later that evening, as the moon cast a silvery glow over the estate, Henry found himself wandering the garden, his thoughts consumed by the revelation of Kyle's intentions. The flowers swayed gently in the night breeze, but the beauty of the scene did little to ease the turmoil in his heart. He felt torn between his love for Rebecca and the overwhelming evidence of her family's betrayal. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. As he paced the garden, he heard footsteps approaching, and his heart skipped a beat. He turned to see Rebecca walking toward him, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "John, what are you doing out here so late?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic. Henry swallowed hard, struggling to maintain his facade. "Just checking on the plants. They need a bit of care at night, you know?" Rebecca's brow furrowed slightly, but she smiled. "You really care about them, don't you? I've never seen anyone put so much effort into gardening. It's refreshing." Henry smiled back, though his heart ached at the thought of what lay ahead. "I suppose I just like to nurture things. It's rewarding." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Is everything okay? You seem a bit on edge." "Just the usual wedding jitters," he replied, hoping she would buy the excuse. "I want everything to be perfect for you." Rebecca nodded, her expression softening. "It will be. I know our families have their differences, but I believe in us. We'll make it through anything together." "Together," Henry echoed, the word feeling like a promise and a burden all at once. He had to protect her, but how could he do that without breaking her trust? As the silence stretched between them, He felt a pang of guilt for keeping his true identity hidden. "Have you talked to your brother lately?" he asked, testing the waters carefully. Her brow creased again. "Not really. He's been distant. I think he's going through something, but he never opens up about it. I wish he would." Henry nodded, feeling a surge of empathy for her. Family can be complicated. "Yeah," she sighed, her gaze drifting to the ground. "Sometimes I feel like they don't understand me at all. It's like they have this idea of who I should be. But you, Henry, John," she caught herself, "you see me for who I really am." The sincerity in her words tugged at his heart. "I see you, Rebecca, and I care about you more than anything." Just then, a rustling noise broke the moment, and Henry's instincts kicked in. He turned to see Kyle emerging from the shadows, a smirk plastered on his face. "Oh, what a lovely scene we have here. The gardener and my sister, sharing secrets under the stars." Rebecca's expression shifted to one of annoyance. "Kyle, what are you doing here? This is private." Henry's heart raced as he braced for the confrontation. "I was just leaving," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "No need to rush off, John," Kyle said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I was just telling Rebecca how important family is. Sometimes it's best to know your place." Henry clenched his fists at his sides, anger boiling beneath the surface. "And what place would that be, exactly?" Kyle stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from playful to menacing. "You think you can just waltz into our lives and take my sister away? You're nothing but a glorified gardener. Rebecca deserves better." "Better than what, Kyle?" Henry shot back, his voice steady despite the fury within. "Better than someone who loves her?" Rebecca looked between them, her eyes wide with concern. "Stop it, both of you." Kyle scoffed, waving her off. "This is ridiculous. You can't even see how pathetic he is. Just a pawn in the game. You really think he has your best interests at heart?" Henry took a step forward, his resolve hardening. "You're the one playing a game here, Kyle. I've seen how you treat people, and I won't let you drag Rebecca into your schemes." The tension hung thick in the air, and for a moment, it felt as if the garden itself held its breath. Kyle's eyes narrowed, and Henry could see the gears turning in his mind. This was just the beginning, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever. "Watch your back, gardener," Kyle said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Henry and Rebecca standing in the moonlight, their thoughts racing. Henry's heart ached as he watched her expression shift from anger to sadness. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca," he began, but she held up a hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Don't apologize for standing up to him. I can't believe my brother would do something like this. I thought he was just protective." Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I need you to know the truth about what I've uncovered. Your family is hiding something dangerous." Rebecca looked at him, confusion etched on her face. "What do you mean?" "I can't tell you everything right now, but I promise I'll protect you. We need to confront this together." As they stood side by side, the enormity of their situation loomed over them. But in that moment, amidst the chaos, Henry felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they would navigate the treachery that awaited them, fueled by love and the determination to unearth the truth. The grand ballroom of the Miller estate was adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, inviting glow over the elegantly dressed guests. The soft hum of classical music filled the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of the well-heeled attendees. Henry Dalton, still disguised as John the gardener, stood at the edge of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The charity gala was in full swing, and he felt a mix of anticipation and dread as he watched Rebecca, radiant in her flowing emerald green gown, move gracefully through the crowd. Henry had spent weeks in the Miller household, digging deeper into the family's secrets, and tonight was the night he would finally reveal his true identity to Rebecca. The overwhelming desire to protect her surged within him, pushing him to take the decisive step that could change everything. As he watched her smile, he felt a surge of love and determination. He couldn't let her become a pawn in her family's cruel game. "John!" a voice called out, snapping him back to reality. It was Mr. Miller, Rebecca's father, his imposing figure cutting through the crowd. "Come here, lad. We need you to help with the flowers at the entrance." Henry forced a smile, feeling the weight of the disguise on his shoulders. "Of course, sir," he replied, masking his true feelings. He followed Mr. Miller to the entrance, where arrangements of exotic blossoms adorned the space. The scent of lilies and roses wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the rot that lay beneath the surface of the Miller family. As he carefully adjusted the flowers, Henry overheard snippets of conversation from nearby guests. "Did you hear about the Dalton wedding? Such a scandal, marrying into that family," one woman whispered to her companion. "Money can't buy class," the friend replied with a disdainful laugh. Henry clenched his jaw, the disdain in their voices only fueling his resolve. He had to protect Rebecca from the venom that surrounded her family. He finished arranging the flowers and turned to face the ballroom again, scanning the crowd for Rebecca. There she was, laughing with a group of friends, her eyes sparkling with joy. But as he looked closer, he could see the shadows lurking around her, the glances exchanged between her family members that hinted at their true intentions. It was then that he knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Rebecca," he whispered to himself, steeling his nerves. He made his way through the throngs of guests, his heart racing with each step. When he reached her, she turned, her expression shifting from delight to surprise. "John, what are you doing here?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I need to talk to you, Rebecca. It's important," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, pulling her gently away from the crowd. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concern etching her features. "Not yet, but it could be," he replied, glancing around to ensure they were out of earshot. "I can't keep this up any longer. I can't hide who I am from you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, confusion flickered across her face. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just John, the gardener. I'm Henry Dalton," he confessed, feeling the weight of his revelation settle heavily between them. Rebecca stepped back, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Henry? But how? Why would you?" "Because I love you, Rebecca. I've been watching your family, and I fear for you." "They're not who you think they are," he said urgently. "Henry, please, you're scaring me," she stammered, glancing toward the ballroom, where laughter echoed, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding just outside. "I've seen things, Rebecca. Your brother is planning something terrible, something that could hurt you," he continued, fear tightening his chest. "I need you to trust me." She shook her head slowly, still processing the information. "This isn't making any sense. My family, they're good people." "Are they?" Henry challenged gently. "I've seen how they treat their staff, the way they talk about their friends. It's all a facade. And your brother? He's involved in something that could ruin us both." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of doubt in her gaze. "What do you mean?" Before Henry could respond, the sound of the microphone being tapped echoed through the ballroom. Mr. Miller's booming voice commanded attention, pulling the guests' focus away from their conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering tonight for this wonderful charity gala," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. Henry's heart raced. This was it. He needed to act before the opportunity slipped away. "Rebecca," he urged, his voice low but intense, "let's go in. You need to hear this." She hesitated but nodded, and together they stepped back into the ballroom, the opulence of the event surrounding them like a shroud. The crowd was all eyes on Mr. Miller, who continued to speak, extolling the virtues of generosity and community service, his words dripping with insincerity. As Henry and Rebecca approached the front, he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had to reveal the truth, not just for himself but for Rebecca's sake. Gathering his courage, he stepped forward, interrupting Mr. Miller mid-sentence. "Excuse me, everyone." Henry's voice rang out, cutting through the chatter and laughter like a knife. The crowd turned, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as they recognized him. "Who invited the gardener to speak?" someone muttered, but Henry pushed the noise aside. "Mr. Miller, I need to speak to you and your family about your true intentions," he said firmly, locking eyes with Rebecca, whose expression shifted from shock to concern. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Miller thundered, his face reddening at the interruption. Your family is not who you claim to be, and I have evidence of your deceit, Henry declared, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as the guests exchanged incredulous glances. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat, and she looked at Henry, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Henry, please. You don't know what you're saying, she whispered, her voice trembling, but he pressed on, determined. I've seen your brother meeting with unsavory characters. I've heard the way your parents speak about their wealth and power. They're planning to use you as a pawn in their game, Rebecca. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Rebecca's expression shifted from disbelief to desperation as she searched his eyes for the truth. Henry, stop, she pleaded, but he couldn't. Your family is not just protective. They're dangerous, he urged, his heart racing as he fought to convey the urgency of his message. They're not worth your trust. The room erupted in whispers, and Henry could feel the tension building as the truth began to seep into the minds of the guests. Enough, Mr. Miller shouted, fury radiating from him. You have no right to speak to my family like this, you insolent. But Henry cut him off. I have every right. I love Rebecca, and I won't stand by and let you manipulate her anymore. Rebecca, caught in the storm of emotions, looked between Henry and her family, the realization of the situation dawning on her. The truth was laid bare before her, and the weight of her family's deceit began to press down on her heart. The gasps from the crowd echoed in her ears, but all she could focus on was Henry's unwavering gaze, filled with love and determination. Henry, she began, but her voice faltered. As the tension in the room reached a breaking point, a wave of shock washed over the guests, their gasps mingling with the disbelief in Rebecca's eyes. Henry had laid the truth bare, and the ramifications of such revelations loomed over them like a dark cloud. Is this true? A voice rang out from the crowd, breaking the silence. What proof do you have? Henry took a deep breath, ready to confront the darkness that had ensnared Rebecca's family. The moment had come, and he could feel the eyes of everyone in the room upon him, waiting for him to reveal the truth that would shatter the facade the Millers had carefully constructed. But as the tension thickened, he realized that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, betrayal, and the hope that love could triumph over the shadows of deceit. The evening was far from over, and the truth was only just beginning to unfold. The atmosphere in the Miller household was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the walls and seeped into the very fibers of the plush carpets. Rebecca stood in the living room, heart pounding, as the echoes of Henry's revelations reverberated through her mind. The charity gala, once a symbol of hope and celebration, had transformed into a stage for betrayal, and now she confronted the very people she thought she knew. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly but laced with determination. She faced her parents, who were seated on the ornate sofa, their expressions a mix of shame and defiance. "I deserve to know the truth about what's been happening." Her mother, Eleanor, looked away, her perfectly manicured hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Rebecca, please, this isn't the time." "No, it is the time," Rebecca interrupted, her emotions surging. "Henry exposed everything tonight. I can't believe you would allow our family to stoop this low. Extortion? How could you?" Her father, Charles, finally spoke, his voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Rebecca. "You have to understand, sweetheart, this is about survival. We've made sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" Rebecca scoffed, incredulous. "You mean sacrifices to keep up appearances and protect your pride? What about me? What about my life? I thought I was marrying into a family that valued integrity." "Integrity?" Her brother, Luke, chimed in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, a smug expression plastered on his face. "You think that's what this is about? This is a game, Rebecca. A game we've played since you were born. And you're just an unwitting pawn." At that moment, the weight of the truth crashed down on her. Luke, her own brother, had been behind the sinister plots she had only begun to uncover. "You're the one behind this," she whispered, horrified. You're the reason Henry had to go to such lengths? Luke shrugged, unfazed. What can I say? I wanted to protect what's ours. You were too busy playing house with a billionaire to see the bigger picture. Protect what's ours? Rebecca's voice rose, fueled by anger and hurt. You mean your greed? Your selfish desire to keep our family name pristine, even if it means ruining someone else's life? You're disgusting. Careful, Luke warned, a dangerous glint in his eye. You don't want to cross me, Rebecca. You have no idea how far I'm willing to go to keep our family's secret safe. You think you can just walk away from this? You're naive. Rebecca felt her heart race, a mix of fear and rebellion surging within her. I won't be part of this anymore. I won't let you or anyone else dictate my life. I love Henry, and I refuse to let your twisted sense of loyalty ruin that. Love? Luke laughed bitterly. This isn't a fairy tale, sis. You think he loves you? He's an outsider, and the moment he realizes what you are, what your family truly is, he'll leave you in the dust, just like everyone else. Enough. Eleanor's voice rang out, firm and commanding. We will not discuss this here. We will not air our dirty laundry in front of guests. We can handle this privately. Rebecca shook her head in disbelief. Private? This is my life, Mom. I deserve to know what's been going on in our family, and I deserve to have a say in it. If you think I'll just sit back and let this happen, you're dead wrong. The tension escalated as Rebecca's resolve solidified. She could no longer stand by and allow her family's toxic dynamics to dictate her happiness. You need to decide what's more important, your reputation or your daughter, she said fiercely, her eyes locking onto her father's. Rebecca, please, Charles pleaded, but his tone was softer now, revealing a hint of vulnerability that hadn't been there before. We just wanted to protect you. Protect me, she echoed, the hurt evident in her voice. By lying to me? By manipulating me? That's not protection. That's betrayal. As the argument simmered, Rebecca felt her heart break into pieces. She had always looked up to her family, believing they stood for something. Now, the truth seemed like a dark cloud, threatening to engulf her. She turned on her heel, feeling the weight of their stares as she stormed out of the room, needing air, needing to think. Outside, the moonlight bathed the garden in a silvery glow, the flowers dancing gently in the cool evening breeze. Rebecca sank onto a bench, burying her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She felt so lost, torn between the family she had always cherished and the love she had found with Henry. Rebecca! A familiar voice broke through the silence, and she looked up to see Henry approaching, concern etched on his face. I heard. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault, she whispered, her voice breaking. I should have seen it sooner. I should have trusted my instincts. Henry knelt beside her, reaching out to hold her hand. You didn't do anything wrong. You believed in them. You wanted to see the best in your family. But they're not who I thought they were, she confessed, her heart aching. I can't believe I was so blind. Henry squeezed her hand gently. You're not blind, Rebecca. You were hopeful. It's a beautiful thing to love and trust, even when it's misplaced. But now you know the truth, and you have a choice to make. What if I lose everything? She asked, her voice trembling. What if I lose my family? Sometimes, losing toxic relationships is the only way to truly find yourself, he said softly. You can't let their choices dictate your happiness. You deserve to choose your own path, and I'll be here with you. Rebecca looked into Henry's eyes, the warmth and sincerity there igniting a flicker of hope within her. You really mean that? Of course, he replied, his voice steady. We'll face this together. Whatever happens next, you're not alone. I'm here for you, always. With those simple words, Rebecca felt a surge of strength. The weight of her family's expectations and secrets began to lift, replaced by a burgeoning sense of freedom. In that moment, she realized that love was not just about trust but also about standing for what was right, even when it was hard. I want to break free from this, she declared, her voice stronger now. I want to be with you and build a life based on honesty and love, not deceit. Henry smiled, genuine and warm, and Rebecca felt the last remnants of doubt begin to fade away. Together, they would navigate the storm ahead, determined to find their way through the chaos her family had created. She squeezed his hand tightly, knowing they would face whatever came next side by side, stronger together than apart. As the gala continued in full swing, the atmosphere was thick with tension following Henry's shocking revelation. The grand ballroom, adorned with sparkling chandeliers and elegant decorations, felt suffocating to Rebecca. She stood on the periphery, her heart racing, trying to process everything that had just transpired. Her family had been exposed, and the weight of their deceit hung heavy in the air. "Rebecca," Henry called softly, breaking through her reverie. He stepped closer, his expression a blend of concern and determination. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know, Henry. I thought I knew my family, but now I feel like I'm living in a nightmare." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance of the ballroom. A figure emerged from the shadows, drawing everyone's attention. Clad in a simple yet elegant outfit, the newcomer strode forward with an air of confidence that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding the Millers. Whispers rippled through the crowd, curiosity piqued. "Who is that?" Henry murmured, his instincts kicking in. He sensed that this figure might hold the key to the night's unfolding drama. The figure, a woman in her early 40s with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, raised a hand to silence the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and commanding, "I am here to reveal the truth about the Millers, the truth that has been hidden for far too long." Rebecca's heart raced as she instinctively grasped Henry's hand. Who was this woman? What did she know? The murmurs in the room grew louder, but the woman continued undeterred. "I have documents that expose the extensive fraud perpetrated by this family," she said, her gaze locking onto Rebecca's parents, who stood frozen in shock. "I worked with them for years, and I can no longer stay silent." The tension in the room escalated. Rebecca's brother, Michael, stepped forward, his face pale but defiant. "Who do you think you are? You have no proof," he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. The woman smiled, a knowing smile that sent a shiver down Rebecca's spine. "I have everything I need, Michael. Copies of bank statements, emails, and contracts that will implicate your entire family in a web of deceit and extortion." With that, she pulled a file from her bag, thick and bulging with papers. As she opened it, the room fell silent, all eyes glued to the unfolding drama. She began to read from one of the documents, her voice steady and clear. On February 15th, a transaction of $500,000 was made to an offshore account under your father's name, indicating a clear intention to defraud investors. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Gasps filled the room as the guests exchanged incredulous looks. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. She felt a mix of fear and hope. Could this be the end of her family's reign of deceit? Rebecca's father, now visibly sweating, stepped back as if trying to retreat from the inevitable confrontation. "This is absurd," he exclaimed, desperation creeping into his tone. "You can't believe her. She's lying." "Enough," the woman snapped, her voice rising above the murmurs. "You think you can silence the truth? You've built your life on lies, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." Henry squeezed Rebecca's hand, offering silent support. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Who is she? Why is she doing this?" "I don't know," he replied, equally intrigued and wary, "but I think she's on your side." As the woman continued to lay out the evidence, she turned to Rebecca. "You deserve to know the truth about who your family really is, Rebecca. They have been using you, manipulating you for their own gain. You're stronger than you think, and it's time to take control of your life." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as the weight of her family's betrayal crashed down on her. The woman's words resonated deep within her, igniting a fire she didn't know she had. With every piece of evidence presented, Rebecca felt her resolve strengthen. She was no longer just the naive daughter. She was a woman ready to reclaim her life. Michael, sensing the tide turning against him, turned to Rebecca with a pleading look. "Rebecca, please. They're just lies. You know us. We love you." Rebecca shook her head, the realization settling in. You don't love me, Michael. You love what I can give you, what you can gain from me. You don't care about my happiness. The room went silent again as the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Rebecca's parents exchanged worried glances, the facade of their perfect family crumbling around them. Enough of this, her father growled, anger rising in him. You're being manipulated by this woman. She's trying to ruin our family. The whistleblower stepped forward, unflinching. Your family is already ruined, Mr. Miller, by your own actions. And now, you will face the consequences. With a flourish, she handed the documents to a nearby police officer who had been quietly observing the scene unfold. I suggest you investigate these claims. The evidence is damning. As the officer began to peruse the documents, the tension in the room shifted. Guests began to murmur amongst themselves, some expressing disbelief, others anger. The mood had changed. They were no longer there to celebrate the Millers, but to witness the unraveling of their carefully constructed lives. Rebecca felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, but also relief. She was no longer trapped in a web of lies. With Henry by her side, she could finally break free. Rebecca, Henry said softly, drawing her attention back to him. You don't have to go back to them. You have a choice now. We can start fresh together. Her heart swelled at his words. I want that, Henry. I want to build a life based on love and honesty, not deceit. As the police officers moved in to detain Rebecca's parents and Michael, the weight of the moment began to settle. Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling a sense of liberation wash over her. She had the power to choose her path, and she chose Henry. With the truth finally unveiled, the Millers faced a reckoning they could not escape. Rebecca stood tall, realizing that she was free from the shadows of her past. She turned to Henry, a smile breaking through her tears. Let's go home. He nodded, a soft smile gracing his lips. Together, as they walked out of the gala, hand in hand, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was theirs to navigate, built on trust and true love. Finally free from her family's grasp, she was ready to embrace her future with Henry. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.